So Kai Asakura versus Alexandre Pantoja.
Yep.
We got a guy making his debut fighting for the undisputed belt, which is not all that often that happens in the UFC.
Right.
And we're going to see if the young Kai Asakura is as good as advertised and if he's able to hold up to the level and the standard of what is the benchmark in the industry, the UFC. You know, we've seen time and time again with, for example, like a Ben Askren,
Right.
where somebody's very, very dominant in a different organization, Ryzen, one championship, Bellator, even PFL, and they come into the UFC and they don't see the same success that they saw in other organizations. Now,
Right.
Kai Asakura, I believe, is a very deserving fighter to get a belt. And it's weird saying that because he's never fought in the UFC before.
True.
But he's fought some really good competition within the organizations that he's fought in before.
Right.
His last win was a knockout win against Juan Archuleta. Juan is a very good fighter.
Yeah.
You know, we knew Juan from back in the day when he used to train with TJ Dillashaw.
Great guy.
Really, really a high-level guy. And so to suffer a knockout loss to Kai Asakura kind of speaks volumes to where his level might be, but we
Right.
won't actually know. Now, Pantoja is good all around. He's got some pop for 125. He can take a shot. He does absorb 4 significant strikes per minute, but he throws about the same volume, so it's kind of 50-50 in that, as far as that's concerned. Now, his grappling is where he can really shine. He's got great takedowns, really creative on the mat, really nice back takes and things like that, and I think that's the area that he may be able to exploit on Kai Asakura. And then for Kai, I think he's going to need to use that distance. But I want to get your thoughts on the fight, and then we're both going to ultimately make our predictions.
Yeah, I love this fight, and it's really fun to see something like this experiment where you got a pro debut, a UFC debuter fighting for a title, and when the UFC
That would be really interesting if it was a pro debuter fighting for a title.
right, CM Punk thrown right in for a title shot. So it's really interesting because that tells you what the UFC thinks about this young guy, and the UFC they're always looked at as an organization that seems to stick their nose up to all other promotions because their level is so much higher. But they aren't blind to talent in other promotions. And if there's somebody that's really good out there, they will figure out how to get a hold of him. And look, Kai Asakura, he might not be a name here in America right now, but if you get thrust into a title shot, there's some serious stuff on that, especially when it's your debut. And for me, I've been watching some of his fights. I know a little bit about his fighting style, and he's got a style, especially at 125, that could be very exciting for the fans to watch. High intensity, very explosive striking, creative striking, incredible scramblings as far as the grappling and wrestling goes. I think he might actually have a wrestling advantage over Pantoja, a slight wrestling advantage, but the jiu-jitsu will definitely even that part out because Pantoja is very good once he starts to get the positions he likes on the ground. So this fight to me, it's going to be very interesting because we don't have as much to go off of from Kai Asakura's career fighting guys in the UFC. And we all know that there's a difference in level from the UFC and anybody else that's running an MMA promotion. So I'm really interested in seeing just how good he is. He could be better than we're expecting, or he could be worse than we're expecting. And most of the time when these guys come over, they don't live up to the expectations. Sometimes they do. Justin Gaethje's done quite well after coming over.
Yeah.
Ben Askren, not so much. So I'm really interested in seeing how this goes. But if I'm looking at it, I got to go with the guy who has been, he's now considered a vet, a grizzled monster, a champion in the UFC in Pantoja. He's just seen so many styles. He knows how to win fights against very differing styles. That means he's good at game planning. He's in sync with his coaches, and they understand, okay, we got a heavy striker. We know what we need to do. We need to stay at bay, keep our distance until we can find our openings. Get your striking going. Don't show Kai that you're afraid of his striking. I don't think Pantoja's afraid of anybody at flyweight striking. But he knows where his bread and butter is, and he knows that if he can get Kai to the ground, especially after the videos that have been surfacing these past couple weeks of Kai, sparring at the PI with like Merab Dvalishvili, and he's been sparring with a few other people, and it's play sparring, it's fun, it's not high intensity, but they're able to grab a hold of his legs very easily. Merab's almost doing it like for fun, like he's making a joke of it. He's like, I'll throw a couple strikes and I'll just grab your leg when I want and let it go. And so I'm worried that if Kai tries to get inside too much and strike and get his hands off, that Pantoja will be able to get inside, body lock, some sort of trip variation to get the fight to the ground. And that's why I'm interested in seeing if Kai's able to utilize every bit of this of the cage, if he's able to use his range and get off some of these electric strikes that he's known for. If that's the case, it could be an early night for him. But like I said, 125, it's hard to get single shot knockouts. Pantoja's a grizzled vet. He's very good everywhere. He's the champ for a reason. So yeah, I'm not going to spoil it too bad, but I do see Pantoja getting his hand raised.
Yeah, really solid points.
Thank you.
So getting into the X's and O's and where I think this gets really interesting, can Kai Asakura become a UFC champion in his first ever UFC fight?
Yeah.
I believe the answer to that question is yes, he can. Now, it's a tricky road to get there because of a couple of factors. Pantoja is really durable. If you think back to the Brandon Royval fight, that was a scrap.
Great fight.
Pantoja showed a real grittiness, a chin. Even though he got knocked down, he was able to recover fast. And what does Kai Asakura do really well? He cracks.
Yeah.
If you look at his knockout ratio, it's way higher than the average 125er. That's how he wins most of his fights, by knockout. So the likelihood of him winning this fight, if he is to get the fight won, is to do it by knockout. Well, Pantoja is a very difficult guy to knock out. You mentioned also that Kai may even have a slight wrestling advantage over Pantoja. That may be true, but Pantoja has some really good stand-up grappling, not necessarily your traditional doubles and singles, but some really good body locks, some leg entanglements, some trips and things like that he uses to get his opponents to the ground.
Right.
And then when it actually does hit the ground, I think Pantoja has a massive advantage there. So the road to success for Kai Asakura is going to be do some damage very early on in the fight, to create that hesitancy in the champion where he doesn't want to close the distance often and just continue to break down that range that Asakura is able to use. If Asakura is able to hit Pantoja with some really good, meaningful shots early and hurt him, one, it's going to slow his opponent down, and he's going to see the shots coming a little bit more readily than he would if Pantoja was super fresh.
Right.
But also, it's going to make Pantoja think twice if he's getting cracked every time he tries to go in for a body lock. So doing damage early is part number one. And then I don't think this fight's going to end without Kai Asakura having his back on the mat.
Yeah.
So eventually he's going to have to tango with Pantoja on the ground as far as jiu-jitsu is concerned, is to really stay safe and look for your escapes.
Yep.
Don't try to do any damage from the bottom. Don't try to get creative and hunt for a submission from the bottom. That's not going to work against Pantoja. Keep yourself safe. Look for your escape.
Right.
Get up with expending as least amount of energy as possible, because this is a 5-round fight, and you're talking about a very, very durable fighter in Alexandre Pantoja. So I say all that, but then ultimately my prediction is going to be just in line with yours. I think that the level in the UFC is above that of any other organization in the world. I think that's been proven time and time again. As we said, Ben Askren, Justin Gaethje's a great example of somebody who came into the UFC and did well, but never really to the highest of heights. You got Michael Chandler, who everybody loves Michael Chandler, but he's got a losing record in the UFC.
Right.
There's guys that are really good. Even Yuri Prochazka came in. He had a big head of steam, but now he's kind of win one, lose one sort of fighter. I just think that Alexandre Pantoja is the best 125er on the planet right now, and I say that because Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson just retired not that long ago. And yes, while he was in another organization, he is a UFC guy through and through.
Right.
So, my thought around the fighters who are outside of the UFC not being as good as the fighters in the UFC, at least at the top of the heap, the exception to that is DJ. But I'll digress from that point, because I think Pantoja by submission in the third round. I think he's going to have a tough first 2 rounds. I do think he's going to have to dig into that durability that he's got a little bit, because I think he's going to absorb some big shots. But ultimately, I think towards the end of the second round, third round, he's going to start to find his entrances. He's going to get those body locks. He's going to bring Asakura to the ground, and that is where he's going to start to do his best work and ultimately get one of those signature back takes that he's so good at getting and slip in a rear naked choke for the finish.
There you go, all the way down to the finish. I like it. And yeah, I'm going with Pantoja to win this fight, but there's going to be a ton of talent on display in this fight. I'm really excited to see just how advanced these guys are going to fight. So in my opinion, Kai Asakura is going to come out and he's going to prove to the world and to the UFC that he belongs. So I think the first round is going to be electric. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be some wild scrambles that take place. They're going to show us a whole gamut of stuff. And I could even say that I think Kai might win this first round because he's an explosive guy. And we know that explosivity does start to fade later in fights, especially 5-round fights. But in the beginning of a fight, that's when they're most dangerous and they could really find their best shots with the most pop on them. So I'm really excited to see how this fight starts and how Pantoja deals with the adversity early on. As it continues, like I said, being an electric, explosive fighter does weigh on your gas tank. So I do look for Asakura to slow down a little bit as the fight goes on. And when that happens, Pantoja is going to continue to bring his momentum and his pace up and up. And he's going to take him right into those championship rounds where he likes to be. He's very familiar with them. And when you've got a guy making his debut in the UFC, they know there's a difference. Whether Kai has a handful of 5-round fights or not, it's always going to be a little bit different. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this fight plays out. But if I'm going to predict the way I see it going, very electric first round or two, likely going the way of Kai Asakura with some dominant striking, some cool grappling on display, but I don't think anything's going to catch too much for Pantoja. Then we're going to see a little bit tired, a little bit gassed Asakura come out, and we're going to see the turning of the tide. We're going to see Pantoja start to take over, have a little bit more success on the feet as he goes for these level changes and takedowns and some cage work to try to wear and grind out on Asakura. Once we see that, I think we see a little bit more vulnerable Asakura on the ground, somebody who's not as good as finding their escapes once Pantoja finds his dominant positions, and ultimately we see a submission finish. I'm going 4th round rear naked choke, Alexandre Pantoja. A great debut for Asakura. He's going to sit right there in the top 3 after this performance. I believe his star will continue to rise even if he loses his debut, but I'm going Pantoja.
Sounds good. Love the prediction.
Thank you.